And welcome to this course where we're going to talk about how you can heal the inner child and unleash your true self. It's really important that we go through some various states here, starting with brain development. I promise to keep it short and sweet, but we want to talk about brain development, the states of our nervous system. We want to look at regulation. We want to look at attachment and survival. We're going to look at 5 adaptive survival styles, five biologically based core needs, and of course, how we could build resilience. So I shared this course here with you, and I'm going to take my face off so that it's not so distracting. Most people try to fix behavior, their mindset, or their motivation without realizing that they're really bumping up against this unmet developmental need that's wired deep in our nervous system. It's actually at a cellular level. So this course is intended to kind of take you beneath the surface, back to that blueprint of your true self. And the idea here is that you'll discover how the early experiences of trust, safety, regulation, touch, and nourishment shaped your body's lifelong patterns of stress and self-protection. None of this is about blame. It's actually about your biology, your unique blueprint, and the incredible adaptability of your nervous system. So you're going to learn how to recognize some old survival wiring, how you can start to rebuild safety from the inside out, and begin meeting the 9 essentials that I'll share that every child and adult needs to thrive. Building resilience isn't about what happened to you or isn't about what's wrong with you. It's about what happened to you and what your system is still waiting for. So the good news is those needs can still be met. And we're going to start out by looking at this PowerPoint and how it is that the sequence of engagement is first. So this is the brain development piece. It's really important you understand this. This is from the work of Dr. Bruce Perry in the Neurosequential Network. And you look at it from the bottom up. This is how the brain develops after conception. When nervous system development occurs, it starts at that lower brainstem level. This is where the functional survival portions of our body or our brain is developed, our temperature, our heart rate, our blood pressure, and also where, all of the sensory input comes in, right? The things we see, taste, smell, touch. So even in utero, the touch is one of the first things for baby, the touch of the amniotic fluid sort of pulsing against its skin. It ends up hearing sound, obviously, through mom's, it's attached to mom's nervous system. Right now, it's borrowing her nervous system to survive. And so that brainstem level is what's developed first. Now, if there is some type of disruption at this level, then it could potentially impact the later development. So next, the diencephalon and the limbic system is around that. That's what comes online next. That's going to determine where we get, where our sleep, our appetite and satiety, our arousal. We're going to see motor regulation, our emotional reactivity. That's that limbic area, the emotional part of your brain, the relate portion, how we relate to others, ourselves, and the world. And then sexual behavior and attachment. And then the last part to develop is your cortex. That's the thinking or reasoning portion of your brain, where we have abstract thought, concrete thought. We start to affiliate like rewards, based upon what things happen and the reward system. Think about your dopamine levels. Most people have heard of that. So this is the sequence of development. Now, it makes sense, as I mentioned, that if there's disruption at that lower level, say in utero, maybe there was maybe a medical emergency, maybe baby's movement got inhibited because it was like in my son's situation, there was a cord that was wrapped. It was, that was became obviously a very critical thing right before delivery. But throughout pregnancy, if there was substance use, maybe medication, maybe mom got sick and there had to be a medication use. If there's abuse, all of these things, if they are occurring at this brainstem level, could then potentially kind of create that unstable foundation. And as the rest of these areas develop, you may see some of the downstream effects, even though we're kind of going upstream here. You can see some of the effects where if there's issues at the sensory level, then that can then affect the relate level, as in maybe their sleep, their appetite. Think about, colicky babies, their arousal, babies that are that are difficult to console, and then so on and so forth. So that reasoning portion of the brain is the last to develop, 28 to 30 years old. And that area of the brain, when we are in high stressed states, includes adults and children, big behaviors, big emotions, that goes offline. So it's very difficult to find our words because the part where our logical thinking goes offline. And when you're talking about a baby that's in utero or just born, when they're born without their nervous system fully developed. This part of the brain is not even developed. They don't have the ability to downregulate, to take a deep breath or meditate. They're strictly going off of the pre-verbal experiences of co-regulating with their caregiver. Now, the next is going to be the 3 states of your nervous system. Very important to understand the state of your personal nervous system if you want to start rewiring and start to change some of those patterns. Fight, flight, or freeze. Most people lump them together. But we see here through the polyvagal lens, on the left, we see in the middle the parasympathetic, or that social engagement state. This is where we feel calm aliveness. We feel curious, connected to others, socially engaged, that present and grounded state. This is where we want to be, right? Then there becomes a threat. This can be real or perceived. There's something called neuroception, and that is the perception of your nervous system. This is going to be something that can come from the autonomic, or that brainstem level, right? Based on your experiences. This threat can be something that's really here in the present, or it can be literally a reaction that your body is having because of a similar experience or because of a previous experience. When they have that threat, we jump up to that top level where we see threat, and that is your sympathetic or your fight or flight state. This is where we see anxiety, restlessness. We have hypervigilance. Think about the hamster on the wheel. Sometimes you'll see anger or aggression, and this is where we can also see insomnia. Now you'll see how about 3/4 of the way up from the top, that red line. This is what we're going to talk about as your critical line of overwhelm. So what happens? We stay in the stress state for too long. You're going to drop down into that dorsal vagal freeze. This is your freeze response. This is also referred to as overwhelm, your trauma physiology. So you can understand now, most of us haven't escaped this physiology at some point in life. And this is a state that we call, from a biology of trauma perspective, trauma is when you've had too much coming at your nervous system too fast, or you've had too little for too long. So if you think of the infant, maybe there was no prenatal care, maybe there was substance use, didn't get appropriate nutrients. That can be a trauma for that developing nervous system. And the demand on our nervous system is more than we have the capacity for. Now, the picture on the right was just to kind of demonstrate to you that when we're in these different states, how it affects the whole body. The picture on the left, where you see the blue branching out into your social engagement system, that's your parasympathetic state. Think about all that sensory information you're bringing in. This is where what you're seeing, what you're hearing, what you're saying, it comes down into your chest, to the heart, down to the back of the neck. That is that socially engaged part of the nervous system. So that's going to correlate with your brain stem level, that lower level that I showed you on the previous slide. On the right, you can see this autonomic nervous system. This is those automatic functions. You'll see sort of like a gold line, sort of the inside of the spine, blue spine. You'll see sort of gold line. That is your parasympathetic chain. And you can see how that innervates all your organs. So on the left, where you see the red branching, that's that vagus nerve, comes from the brainstem down into your pelvic region, innervates all those organs that you're seeing on the right. So when we're in that shutdown, that freeze state, then you can see how that's going to impact the organs in the body, because that's what your nervous system is meant to do, save your life. So when there's a threat, real or perceived, systems shut down other than life-saving functions, blood is diverted away from these areas to the arms and legs where we need to run from that bear, run from that threat. And some of us can get wired into this high stress state dependent on these early experiences in life. Now, in utero, I've kind of mentioned, neurodevelopment has already begun, and without the nervous system, there is no life. So the nervous system adapts to its environment, and that is when we talk about neuroception. Again, this is your perception, their nervous system perception. And it's based a lot, think about that pre-verbal experience with that infant. And, they don't have words yet. That part of the brain, the thinking part of the brain is not even developed. And so everything they're taking in is going to be based on these pre-verbal experiences. Now, here's those 9 essential needs that I mentioned. This is the complete list of needs for every child, and of course, us as adults as well. We need trust. So that's a core concept of secure attachment. Trust is not built by words, but it's built on consistent nervous system to nervous system safety. So mom and caregiver regulation. Mom's regulation becomes the child's anchor. Regulation, we talk about that co-regulation. It precedes self-regulation for that child. Okay? So that's why when our regulation is modeled, it's actually absorbed through the relationship. It's not taught by logic. Our emotional communication of existing, belonging, feeling like we are a delight. This is a core need for that infant. Relational neurobiology and self-worth development. This is about being seen as a delight through that eye contact. Looking at those facial expressions as mom looks into baby's eyes. The baby knows I'm seen. She sees me. I am a delight. And this is what also, if they don't see that, can rewire the system based on shame. And, where they don't feel the right to exist or belong or take up space. They feel more like a burden. So if there was not, that intentional attunement from the mom, or that, delightful eye contact, maybe she seems frustrated or angry, then sometimes that baby's perception based just that pre-verbal perception can be, I'm a burden, and you see self-worth issues at this point. Resting in the relationship, that's that attachment where baby feels they can be in that parasympathetic state that we looked at. They're safe. There's true rest and, with caregiver. And this is where the caregivers model how to make love feel, not just shown to the child's nervous system. So again, that holding them gently, the rhythmic movement maybe as you're holding them, rocking them. Then we look at supportive autonomy. That's where child is getting a little older now. They're starting to get more, do things on their own, and they need that strong leadership that invites their independence. Adults, we need them to lead with confidence so that children can explore safely. You can think about parents' situation. I can speak of my own, as coming from a divorce. A lot of times we carry a lot of guilt and we let the kids get away with things, and we don't have those really strong boundaries. And, we never set boundaries as love, right? So when we don't do that, the kids learn that we're not maybe the bigger or stronger parent. Then sometimes that love can turn into a way that looks more like control. We need safe movement. I noticed that's missing on this slide here, but we need safe movement. That's body-based integration. The movement helps helps the child. It helps us with metabolize stress hormones. It also integrates those primitive reflexes. You can see that grasp reflex in the slide here, and it's essential for regulation and resilience. Of course, we need healthy nutrition, biochemical regulation, and relational nourishment. as well as food, evaluating what maybe we eat, what the child eats, focusing on, again, around that nutrition, the rhythm. Do you have a family pattern? When it's infant, is there a nice space that you go to, whether you're feeding with a bottle or you're breastfeeding? And it sends this message of repair around mealtime. Of course, we need that safety, that neuroception we've talked about. The child has to feel safe to grow. If there's not a felt sense of safety, then nothing really grows and builds resilience beyond that. Healthy touch, where we have that safe, attuned touch. And, conversely, is that if they don't have it, then the early wiring can be deprivation. And then that would communicate as feeling unsafe. That can rewire literally how the child sees themselves, the world, and the idea of that touch that is a core need. The cycle of trust is, trust is developed before love. And so we talked about ways here. We want that healthy nervous system. So baby has a want or a need. They express it as infants with crying, and generally the adult, with their crying. So whether it's they need a diaper change or they're hungry, the adult comes in and it meets that need. So there's the gratification that develops the trust, and it's this cycle that we want to continue. Trust, predictability, presence, and rest. And that comes through that eye contact, calm breathing, resting in place, giving the message, I exist, I belong, I am a delight. When there's uncertainty in the relationship, it becomes the core feature of an insecure attachment. All right, let's look here more on the cycle of trust. As I mentioned, this is when things happen over and over. There's repeated predictability. Mom is sharing her nervous system with her infant, whether we're talking the developing fetus, or now we've got this newborn, and we get this degree of safety that's wired at a cellular level. This is allowing that bonding to the bigger, stronger person. Of course, we want that healthy attachment. And the thing to know about attachment is the degree of attachment is going to equal degree to which the baby can safely rely on connection with others and with themselves. And as I mentioned, trust occurs before attachment. So let's see here. We'll talk a little now about regulation. We're going to get into the next couple of slides with attunement and then misattunement. So state control, think about those different states of the nervous system that we've seen. This is going to dictate whether there's safety, whether that it escalates quickly, and the degree of regulation. So when the baby arrives in the world, there's an underdeveloped nervous system. That top cortex part of the brain is not developed yet. So unlike most species, right, human infants are born before their neurological development is actually complete. That immaturity is actually by design, because otherwise the child would not fit through the birth canal. So what this means too is that survival depends on something very specific, and that is regulation. After birth, the infant, most suddenly it the cord's cut. Now it needs to breathe and eat and adjust to this life outside the womb. So we can see how, overwhelming you can think that is if you look at it from the infant's perspective. They don't have any ability for regulation when they're at birth. They have the ability for two things when it comes to state control. Communicate to others that they are in a high arousal state. So when they cry, or if you were taught like I was to let your child cry it out, they end up shutting them off and going into that freeze response. And that is not something that we want to see on a consistent basis, because that is the thing that as you go into toddlerhood and its adolescence and adulthood, that freeze response is correlated with long-term health, chronic fatigue, autoimmunity, and various other illnesses. So we want to develop that cycle of trust, meeting their needs, giving them, the sense of safety. And now I'm not in any way saying we're going to be running at every minute, attending to every little thing every single time. Obviously, we're going to build capacity. But that, the idea of the old cry it out, basically when they're crying it out and they're screaming to a point, their nervous system just goes into that collapse state. That's what's actually happening. That autonomic nervous system, it's the foundation of this process. So it's constantly tracking for safety, danger, and threat. And if we are screaming our head off it's indicating threat, then that baby's nervous system is going to automatically shut down. So you can see how these patterns can develop very early in life, and we carry it into adulthood. Now, regulation and attunement. The first 6 months of life is the degree that we will be able to connect to others and want to connect with others. The depth of regulation we experience in these first 6 months, it actually can set the ceiling for how deeply we do connect with others and desire that connection. It's not built in isolation. It's obviously built through co-regulation, and that happens through that attunement we talked about. Mom being able to read what baby needs and meet those needs, thereby developing that trust and love. Attunement is a little bit more about responding to just the needs, though. It's the moment-by-moment synchronization of our nervous systems. It's where that infant learns, when I'm distressed, someone comes and helps me, and I feel calm. And when I reach, someone comes for me. When I signal, whether they're kind of wiggling around or moving around, they're seen. And it's those first 6 months that is so profound. They are not yet wired for separation, because the infant doesn't even know it's separate from mom until 6 months old. So to them, mom isn't another person. She's like their home base, their source of safety, rhythm, and orientation. As the nervous system starts to build predictability and consistency and trust, then of course that safety and that regulation is developed. When there are disruptions before 6 months old, that can act sort of like building the foundation of a skyscraper, right? At that early brainstem level, if it's unstable, then every floor added later can carry the imprint of that instability. So that's why attunement is not optional. It's actually a foundation of safety. The baby's nervous system is constantly reading cues, facial expressions, tone of voice, body temperature, breath. So every sigh and smile, or conversely, that mean, never smiling, kind of always looking angry, that stuff is picked up on as well and can take us down that road to that insecure space. So how do we attune? I kind of went through that already. These first experiences are so crucial. The learning and memory is being formed so fast that a new mom really has about 30 seconds before the nervous system starts reacting, either with safety or rejection. Now, is this to say, oh my gosh, if I'm not in there in 30 seconds to pick up my crying baby, they're going to be insecurely attached? Of course not. It's just letting you know that autonomic nervous system, that preverbal experience, the part of the body, that's scanning for danger, it reacts like a million times faster than the logical or the reasoning part of the brain once it comes online. So close attunement to the child's nervous system is necessary for that transition that facilitates trust and acceptance of the new mom. So, and this slide, I noticed, this was in reference to a foster mom. And so, a lot of times we think that love is enough. And sometimes it's hard to understand and accept when that foster child can't accept our love. Well, that's because they have been in circumstances where they were pulled away from mom, there's attachment wounds, and that trust has to be developed first before it can then evolve into that space of love. The circle of autonomy, this is, around age 2, they're starting to get a little bit more independent, moving around, and they have a want now, but now they experience the parent saying no for the first time. So a securely attached child will accept that no because they see that parent as a bigger, stronger person that's going to make sure they're safe, understood, their needs matter, and they accept that no. So that gives them more freedom to keep on exploring. But what happens when we don't have those boundaries as parents, right? And we're the ones who never follow through. Then the child learns really that to not take us seriously. And that freedom, if you've got the child that has had everything handed, never had any kind of boundary set for them, then it's going to become an issue when they get into school age or become an adult, and then never had, that stable, secure, stronger adult. And then suddenly they think, they're king of the mountain when they get in these teenage years. So that presents, a lot of dysregulation for, generally the family in general. Then we have, of course, the circle of security. And in that circle of security, this is the base that gives them confidence to explore. So now we've got our little toddler that's starting to roam around. They understand mom's keeping them safe. They're getting a little bit more independent. And, we know now mom is watching over me. She delights in me. She's protecting me. She's my safe haven. Parents can follow the child's lead whenever possible at this point, but they've got to take charge, of course, to balance that freedom and that protection. Yeah, I'll just kind of go to the next slide because as we talk about misattunement, yeah, there we go. Misattunement, this is a primary source of dysregulation in the infant. And of course, this can carry on and can be wired. Since we're talking about these early experiences, is what really wires our nervous system. This can cause a lot of internal stress and confusion for the child. Misattunement is the most common cause for an insecure attachment in our society today. And this is often very unintentionally done just because of the state of our world right now. And it's not because of bad parenting necessarily. Of course, it can be, but it's the resulting lack of that adequate regulation and is actually considered an attachment trauma. Now, this can result in gaps or injuries to that developing nervous system. So think back to that slide where I showed you how that brain's developing. If there's a misattunement at that infancy stage where there's no co-regulation, there's no gentle, consistent, predictable care, then that's going to start causing these gaps and these injuries to the nervous system, which then, of course, is going to be that unstable foundation building into those later developmental years. Attachment trauma can actually begin here and have lasting effects. These early gaps, they kind of leave, like, if you say the fault lines, if you will, if we're talking about like the architecture of regulation. And this actually shapes the stress response. This shapes relational patterns and vulnerability to future trauma. So insecure attachment oftentimes there can be a predisposition for more trauma when, trauma begets trauma. Some of the modern risk factors that can intensify misattunement is, medicalizing birth, early separation. So then there's this interruption in the bonding, and the overwhelm is too much for that nervous system. Again, this can be life-changing. This can be life-saving measures. If you think about that child was rushed off to the NICU, well, of course, we've got to do life-saving measures. There's going to be a bit of an attachment wound there because they didn't get that bonding time, that kangaroo time with mom, to start to realize that, like, yes, mom's nervous system's still there. Like, baby's now breathing on its own and can eat, but that's the only things that are fully functional at the time of birth. So these misattunements can happen unintentionally. Parental stress or burnout, when you've got caregivers that are dysregulated, then they sometimes can't consistently see the child's cues. Think about postpartum depression. This is something that happens to many people, and there's no shame in that at all. But if you have that, you can see where there may be some misattunement. Overstimulation or disconnection. So screens, fast-paced environments, not having that face-to-face time in subtle moments can cause misattunement. And then, of course, cultural pressures, where we see ideals, right now, of independence are pushed around. They think that the little infant can operate as an independent being when it's first born, and that's not true. It's literally doesn't even have a fully developed nervous system at that point. So, misattunements that go on for so long can, we can see where if parents separate too soon, there can be a clinginess, and this can be seen as a weakness rather than a survival need. So misattunement and disruptions, how does that look? That's where your stress response is going to come into play, obviously for life-saving reasons, because the need wasn't met. We're going to go into that stress response initially. If there's a mismatch and we don't get that need met, or there's a disconnect of the states, then this is going to cause that internal stress in the infant. When we read reading the infant's emotional state, it does require us to be emotionally and physically present with them in the current moment. And if you think about, when there's several children in the home, or mom's trying to work from home, all the things that we are all going through in this day and age, then this mom is obviously not going to be emotionally attuned with her infant. Now, inevitably, there's going to be rupture, right? There's no perfect parent. There's no perfect human being. So disruptions do happen in every relationship. The really important thing is that we have that repair so we can build that trust. So if the caregiver notices a rupture, they want to respond. If they had to, say baby mom's gone, like for me, I worked 3 jobs, right? So when you get home after that separation from each other, you immediately go into that repair place. You go into holding them and connecting and being attuned so that your nervous system is sharing and co-regulating together, so that we can, really work towards that secure attachment as a result of repairing these ruptures. Research shows that secure attachment isn't about constant, perfect attunement. It's about constant repair. So just remember that modeling for the future through repair, that's when the child learns how to handle relational conflict, that emotional ruptures, which we all have, it's a normal part of life, and of course, restoration throughout the rest of their life. Okay, healthy attachments. Relationships are all about that emotional connection between people and not words. Okay, so again, all of these things we've talked about, the attunement and how we communicate, that felt sense of safety or threat with every interaction is going to determine that relational safety. The attachment experiences impact that developing right brain, and that's the primary mechanism of communication. Okay. Attachment, it is both the simplest and the most complex part of a human. It's where our nervous system learns whether the world's safe or not. And while attachment science used to focus only on toddler milestones and behaviors, we now know it begins much earlier, long before the child can actually speak. Think about those pre-verbal experiences, long before they can walk away. Their nervous system is already mapping whether it's safe, they can trust, and that they belong. What are the hidden roots of attachment pain? Well, attachment is survival. It's our body's way of saying, I'm safe, I'm seen. Will someone come when I cry? Will those needs go unmet? And when that happens, the pain doesn't just disappear, it reshapes us. Attachment pain often becomes the deepest wound of our life, right? It drives our decisions, our coping mechanisms, and even how we regulate emotions. Research will show us, as I mentioned earlier, that insecure attachment is one of the strongest predictors of trauma later in life. What does attachment pain look like? Well, it could be persistent feelings of insecurity or inadequacy. It can be the fear of rejection or abandonment, emotional extremes, explosiveness or total shutdown, and then emotional extremes where there's explosiveness or, oh, that's a, there's a duplicate there. Yeah, so I'll say it again, or total shutdown. And think about this not only from the child perspective, but as an adult, we can kind of see some of these pains even within ourselves. There are 6 core attachment pains. And this is adapted from Dr. Amy Pigian, The Biology of Trauma. This is where I received my certifications. And these are the 6 attachment pains. Hold me, hear me, support me, see me, understand me, love me. If you think about your own life, you may think about the relationships that you've had. And you may see, some of these attachment pains as I go through the next couple of slides in yourself. And it's very common for us to have more than one of the attachment pains, okay? Think about that, the way the nervous system builds and the development builds upon each other. At every stage of development, there's different needs, of course. And so it's very common that you can see more than one need if you notice these. Now, survival styles, these are how the child adapts. There's a connection, the attunement, the trust, the autonomy, and the love sexuality. Most of those I kind of demonstrate how we build those, okay? We build that connection, with the sense of safety and support. We attune with the baby. We learn about that cycle of trust, which leading to that cycle of autonomy. And then, of course, we have love and sexuality. Every child is born with these 5 biologically based core needs. And when caregivers consistently meet these needs, then the child develops that self-regulation, that healthy sense of self, and more importantly, the capacity for secure relationships. But when these are unmet, then the child adapts. They sacrifice a part of themselves to preserve the attachment. And every unmet need gives rise to an adaptive survival style. And that's where these come into play. It's a brilliant but costly strategy that preserves that attachment bond. Just think about how amazing our body is that this is automatic, okay? These adaptations begin as life-saving strategies. But over time, these can harden into different states and then traits. And then, of course, this is going to lead to nervous system patterns, identity distortions, and even health vulnerabilities. So the survival styles, this is sort of a recap of what I just said. Preserves the attachment bond. To survive chronic stress, the body actually hardwires these patterns of hyperarousal. Think about that fight-flight stage, or shut down. So these are wired based on those early experiences. And to make sense of these painful experiences for those needs that are not met, for maybe the babies that go into, the foster system, they don't have that secure, safe base, then the mind can start to create different identifications. And that can be, I'm unworthy, I must be perfect, I don't need anyone. These are different survival strategies that help kids survive, but of course they come at a cost. And then what happens is we go into this shift into adulthood. So this is where we then start to see the disruptions. If there was a connection survival style, for example, and the child didn't feel safe, there's a disruption. We're going to say at that brainstem level. So there was substance use, there was a lot of domestic violence, and that pre-verbal experience for that child's nervous system leaves them feeling unsafe to relax. They disconnect from the body and emotions. Their state then becomes one that's very guarded, hypervigilant, living in their head. And then that can develop into a trait where there's a lot of shame around existing or feeling like a burden, pride in not needing others. And then, of course, that leads to the health risks, which can look like IBS, autoimmune conditions, fibromyalgia. And this is the case for each one of those adaptive connection styles or adaptive survival styles, that we just reviewed. The toddler who stops expressing their needs to avoid rejection becomes the adult who never needs anything, but feels chronically unseen. The child who distrusted everyone to avoid betrayal becomes the adult who craves intimacy, but sabotages closeness. And the little one who learned to stay small and quiet becomes the adult who struggles to set boundaries and speak up. We can develop these bracing patterns as part of that adaptive survival style. Bracing patterns aren't abstract. They actually show up in real everyday ways. So if you think about a lot of chronic tension in the shoulders, this can come from a bracing patterns where you pull your shoulders up all the time. There's actually a cardiothoracic inlet that kind of comes down behind your ears. It's at the vagus nerve, kind of come down behind your ears, branches out. And when we brace and pull our shoulders up to our ears, it actually shuts off emotions coming up from the body. It's a survival style. Headaches, jaw pain, these are all areas that we brace. Bracing for impact, just think about that. Recurring sports or joint injuries, these are things that can result from bracing patterns. Chronic fatigue, adrenal burnout, weight struggles, metabolic syndrome. These aren't random. They're the body's survival strategies and they're evidence of resilience, but can also be signs that you're stuck in trauma. So we talk about ghost to guardians, right? If you've ever read Ghost from the Nursery, it's a great book. It talks about, a lot about the attachment wounds, how we really need empathy, that early, right? The roots of empathy are built in infancy. How that becomes a protective factor to whether we see ghosts, whereas, that unsafe, that child that feels unmet needs, or the angels, those supportive, consistent, predictable caregivers in the nursery. Prevention is their priority, capacity building, and of course, connection last. We can't rewrite some of the stories of our childhood, but we can give ourselves what we needed then, now. Building that resilience, it's not about erasing pain. It's honestly about learning to offer ourselves safety, that attunement, trust, and compassion in the present moment. So what about biology? Okay. And I just want to say in my mini course that stems, or I'm sorry, not in this mini course, in the mini course that's going to stem from this free webinar, we take a deep dive into all of those things we just spoke about, the empathy as a protective factor, and how all of those things play out. If I went into all of that, this would be 2 hours long. So what about biology? And this, of course, is my passion, right? This is how we can start to rewire our nervous system at a cellular level. Many models today don't include these biological factors. And there's epigenetic changes that we know now that can result in a lot of the inconsistencies, and actually it contributes to rewiring some of those disruptions that are often not even talked about. Folate, we know that that's important, obviously, in pregnancy, but too much folate can actually cause problems. And methylation, very important. It's one of the most common biochemical imbalances, is having undermethylation status, that also directly correlates with anxiety. There's correlations with postpartum depression. And again, get deeper into a little bit more of this into the mini course, but I just want to give you a high level overview. You know, these are some of the things that we don't think about that can contribute. So how do we build resilience? Well, it's with regulation, with safety, with capacity, and connection. And we have to do it in the right sequence. We need that regulation, self-regulation, so we can co-regulate with our infant. That will give us the felt sense of safety. And then we can start getting that, learning to track that safety by noticing our body sensations, and then utilizing some of the body-based exercises to make sure we have that felt sense of safety and we can bring it to our body when we need it. This is going to, of course, build capacity, and then ultimately it's going to build that lasting connection. A new way forward from surviving to thriving is children unseen. They silence their needs. And the adult who silence their needs, they end up living disconnected and dysregulated lives. So what awareness is everything. Awareness is where we are. It begins transformation so we can have more joy. Hashtag, we'll just put more joy together. This is my Freedom Foundation. I'm working really hard now on what I'm calling the Roots for Freedom, because we really need to look at our body as an entire system. We need to kind of meet you where you are, and start to bring in safety, and look at just the small steps that we can take, those micro moments of safety that we can build into our life, into our routines, and have that lasting joy and capacity that we need. This is basically my Essentials of Health, which is what Soul Essentials is built on. And this is looking at faith and fun, at resilience. Resilience is going to be talking specifically to the topic today. Energy, looking at that mitochondrial impairment, looking at environment, internal environment and external environmental changes that we can make, even small changes like the lighting we have in our house, I'll just say, for example, and that can bring a sense of safety if there's a lot of sensory overwhelm. Looking at our nutrition and nourishment, looking at optimizing sleep, and of course, looking at movement. All of these things build what I always like to say is find your fire, right? Rise up. This is where we learn to regulate. We can bring in internal safety so that we can see the world as a safe place to explore. This is what we're going to model for our children. We're going to utilize the support system. And most importantly, we're going to give ourselves permission. This is an overview. Please take a look at my mini course that Heal the Child, Unleash Your True Self. It goes a lot. It goes much more into depth. If you want to book a free discovery call, we can talk for 20 minutes, see if we need to schedule a brainstorming session, or maybe you just might want to dive into some of the other courses that sort of start at a beginner level and take you through this process. Don't hesitate to ask for help. If you're experiencing challenges, it's really important to seek support, and you don't have to worry about shame or blame. This is part of being a human on this earth. If you'd like to book that discovery call, you can email me at soessentialshw@gmail.com, or you can email me at vicky@soulessentialswellness.com. The foundational journey is that biology of trauma. There's a link there. If you need access to these slides, I can send them to you, but that's where Dr. Amy does a 21-day journey, and it really teaches you. They spend 7 days on safety, 7 days on support, 7 days on expansion. These are things I do touch on, and can show you, however, they go into this in much more depth. You're with Dr. Amy, and you're with her somatic experiencing practitioners, and they're also a massive and beautiful resource. I use one of their coaches still to this day for my own self and for my own healing journey. So hope that you enjoyed this mini course. I hope to see you in the biology or in the mini course. I hope to see you in my Soul Essentials community. It's free to join. It's not on social media, and you can come with, pajamas and your coffee, and we can have some real talk and really support one another. So I look forward to seeing you in the community, and I hope you've enjoyed this webinar.